Yeah, that's not funny.
Yo, Dan, Joe Batista bomb. Oh,
Dude, oh my god.
I just cracked this whole windshield. My fault.
Hey, welcome, new week. Today we talk about safe consumption sites, and then we're going to talk about New York and how many arrests are happening there and stuff, like what's going on. Okay, so I'm sure most of you have heard of the idea of safe consumption sites or safe injection sites, kind of interchangeable. One seems to sound much more palpable than the other, so I think people tend to go towards consumption because it's safer sounding and it doesn't sound as intense as injection, but it's the same deal. And what they are basically sites where you can, under the supervision of professionals, of health professionals, you can consume illegal or illicit drugs and not have to worry about overdosing and dying. It is definitely just the nature of it is it's a complex issue, it's a complex idea, because of course the biggest attack against it is that what it does is it normalizes these drugs. It normalizes the use of heroin, and that of course is a concern, and nobody really kind of argues against that, but it's a little bit more of a misunderstanding of what the purpose is. Safe consumption sites, in my eyes at least, are stopgap measures. They're measures to stop the amount of deaths that are happening on a daily basis via overdose. Where if people feel like if they are suffering an addiction of heroin, let's just use heroin as the example here, if they're suffering an addiction of heroin, they can go to a place and not have to worry about dying that specific day. There are other measures, of course, that go into rehabilitation or getting treatment for this addiction, but in the meantime, we might as well stop the deaths from occurring. Okay, so that's what they are. That's what safe consumption sites are, and they have been in other countries. They've been in Canada for a while now. They've been in Denmark for a while now. We have been trying to create safe consumption sites in the US for years, and there have been some underground safe consumption sites that are happening illegally, but when it comes to setting up legal safe consumption sites, it's almost impossible. And one of the biggest ones is in Philadelphia that has been trying to get started for a long time now. They had proposed last year, it was very close to happening. They had proposed a spot in South Philly, and the neighboring residents hated the idea. Protests happened. Trump heard about it, brought it to a federal court, and the court sided with Trump, and then they have been in limbo ever since. However, last week, the place is called Safe House, by the way, they have petitioned the Supreme Court to hear their case for safe consumption sites. So it could potentially come right back up in the narrative, or in the national narrative, if the Supreme Court decides to hear their case. That is a very risky proposition, at least in my eyes, because what that means is whatever the Supreme Court decides, that will probably be law for at least a few years. Of course, there's a big truck outside right now. And honestly, I'm not quite sure why they think now is the good time to have the Supreme Court hear it, because the court that we have now is very right-leaning, and safe consumption sites is a rather niche idea still, so it's not really a mainstream thought. It's going to be tricky to get them to decide on their side. So my main concern is that they're going to vote no on this, and then that's going to be the law of the land for the rest of this safe consumption sites trying to open in other states as well. And then, of course, there's the proposition, even if they do say yes, then Biden is going to have to also say yes along with them. It's a tricky thing that they're trying to do here, and I almost hope that the Supreme Court decides not to hear the case, because I don't want them to vote no against this and then kind of ruin the chances for every other site across the country. Like, places in Denver are pretty far along, places in Seattle are pretty far along. I think it's a very important thing that we have these places show up in different cities. Of course, the location of the places in cities matters, but there are studies that have come out that show that people, if they go weekly to these safe consumption sites, there's a much lower risk of death for them when they're consuming these drugs. And again, I don't want to make it sound like we're normalizing the idea of injecting heroin, but it is a thing. And in many cultures or in many parts of society, it is normalized. So we need to deal with that before we can deal with the overarching problem of addiction in the first place. Okay, that's my spiel on safe consumption sites. We're going to go to a better story and a more lighthearted story, because there are less arrests happening in New York City, and we knew this would happen because they have legalized marijuana in the city. However, one thing that is different from this city or this state to the other states is that they have made it legal to smoke marijuana in any place where you can smoke tobacco, and that is showing in the data that that's making a difference. For instance, this is from a Marijuana Moment article. In the first quarter of this year, New York City had made 163 arrests for marijuana possession. That was before it was legalized, so that's all fine. And then the latest quarter, it made 8 arrests. Huge difference. The 8 arrests are from people who have more than 3 ounces of marijuana on them, because that is the limit of possession. Let's then compare that to Chicago, where in 2020, after they had legalized marijuana that entire year, they still made almost 3,000 arrests of marijuana, and that is because people were smoking outside. That is because people were smoking above the limit, or they had possession of above the limit, but also that whole idea of smoking outside. See, the problem with legalizing marijuana when you don't legalize its consumption in public is that people have under their impression that they can do whatever they want with marijuana, and that they feel more free doing it, and they feel like cops won't stop them. However, it's still illegal to be smoking out in public in some of these places, like even in Denver. And so you have this kind of incongruity where people get caught more often because they are smoking something that is legal, but that is only legal in specific places. Yet people don't really know that, or don't really understand that, and think that it's more free than it actually is. So New York City has been doing this correctly, and it's showing in the data that just in the last quarter there are only 8 arrests. That's such a small amount of people compared to other years, and I can't wait to see the entire data of this year from New York City, because it's going to be so different from past years of arrests happening in the city. So yeah, that's great news. That's cool. Hopefully every other state kind of takes up that baton, especially like Massachusetts, and starts legalizing consumption of marijuana in any place where you can consume tobacco. Cool, that's it. That's what we have. We'll be back on Wednesday with more stuff. See you then.
Drake. Drake. Drake.